I think people are so frightened of negative emotions. I go, don't feel negative emotions. Whereas this is actually saying that feeling emotions, good or bad, activates the immune system. Now, that doesn't mean that we want people to get stuck in the negative spiral of thinking, but be aware that you can't have joy without sadness. You can't have pleasure without pain. You just cannot experience the other side until you've got the yin and the yang. And I think we live in a world where, the positivity and, we all need to be smiling all the time and think positive thoughts has got out of hand. Let's feel the lot. Make sure we're feeling all of them so we can truly appreciate the good, positive emotions. Otherwise, life is pretty bland.
Welcome, audience, to another episode of Beyond Circumstances. And today I have with me Fiona Cosgrove. Welcome, Fiona.
Thank you, Shiri. I'm delighted to be here.
I am so delighted to have you. So, as always, let me tell you how I met Fiona. So Fiona and I met online through the Global Alliance of Health and Wellness Coaches. It went through, a few incarnations, so to speak, like it changed, and now it's the Global Alliance of Health and Wellness Coaches. And together we collaborated with a fantastic group of health and wellness coaches and put out some really good white papers. And that's how I met you. And I got to know about your work in your school, Wellness Coaching Australia. So I also connected as one school director to another school director, teaching and educating generations of health, wellness, and medical coaches. And we connected. So when I was thinking about this podcast, your name popped up and I said, okay, we have to talk. When we talk about, moving beyond circumstances, and the context is educating and training young health wellness coaches and Mike as health wellness and medical coaches, we need to talk about what it means to move beyond circumstances. How do we train that? How do we address it? How do we talk about emotions? How do we talk about resilience? Okay, so I was like, okay, I need to write Fiona. And you said yes. So for those who don't know you yet, Fiona, please introduce yourself.
Okay, Shiri, I will try and keep it short and relevant, I hope anyway. There's always so much to say, isn't there, when you're doing it for a while. My background was actually in sports science, so my first love was definitely the physical side of things. So I came through a scientific background, academic, very much an academic, but also working in the field. And after a while, I came to recognize that actually understanding people's minds was just as important as understanding their bodies, and also that the two were inextricably linked. So we can't simply look after one without the other. And this is where I went on a journey to study counseling first. And that led me to health and wellness coaching, which was very new. This is nearly 20 years ago. And when I found that, I realized that my two worlds had come together. So I stepped aside from my fitness background, pure fitness, and went into, I'd always been in education. So after a little while, I realized that actually in Australia, there was nobody training health and wellness coaches. So I started in a very small way, mainly talking to people in the fitness industry. Yeah.
You're the first,
And
aren't you?
It grew so that now we're the MBHWC-approved provider, only one in Australia, and one of the first, actually. So we were, I guess, pioneers to a certain extent. And I absolutely love what I do. And yet I'm also an educator, but I'm also a student because I feel I never, ever stop learning. And that's really important for me.
I love that about you. Welcome. Okay. We had a bit of a conversation, and the topic of emotions came up, and that's becoming more and more relevant in our field. So let me ask you this, and I will start with this question. What is, from your perspective, both personal and professional, and as an educator of coaches, what is one thing that most people get wrong when they try to move beyond the crisis or rise above circumstances or whatever buzz title or metaphor you want to give it?
That's a really good question, and I'll sort of answer it with a question, which of course we always do. When I think about getting one thing wrong, firstly, I think there isn't one thing. I think there's lots of things that people do that may not actually be wrong, but it's the way they respond to. And when we talk about circumstances, that's another conversation, isn't it, really? Because there's so many ways your circumstances can change. But let's assume they're challenging circumstances. And what I've seen, I guess, over the years and experienced myself are several different reactions, and these would include quite a few things. So we know the textbook thing is sort of deflecting and denying that this isn't really happening. So put the head in the sand, and that creates problems on its own. Distraction. Let's throw ourselves into something else so we don't really have to think about it, which is in the same family. Sometimes people personalize it, and I'm thinking of kind of things like maybe at the end of a marriage, they take on the "this must be my fault." So it's that locus of control aspect where people feel that something's gone wrong, so therefore I must be to blame, which is very different from saying I have to take some responsibility for this. So
Yeah.
that's another thing. And I've seen all these things. So that's self-blame. And then I think the biggest one is, and it takes time often, but allowing that feeling of hope and despair to take hold. So it's funny that there's so many different things that we could say aren't the most healthy responses to a change in circumstances, and they're just off the top of my head. There's probably many others, and I've probably used them all myself.
We're human beings. We're flawed by nature. So you spoke about the feeling of despair, letting them hold. Say more about that.
Something beautiful the other day when I was thinking about this interview, and there's all these. I find that I get just Shiri between you and I, and you're probably the same, that a lot of my, I guess, knowledge, some understanding comes from a mixture of reading what other people have written, and then applying it to my own experience, which is quite varied and quite long. But one thing I did read the other day says we need hope. So we need hope like we need air. And that was Brene Brown. And that really, some of these things just jump out to you and you go, of course, once you become hopeless, it's kind of the end of the road unless you can pull yourself out and find some way of creating hope, that elusive thing, hope.
Yeah.
So that would be the first thing, is that if I was working with clients or if I was teaching my students, it was to say somewhere in this story, we have to support them in cultivating the feeling of hope.
I love that you said that. Would it be okay if we went deeper into hope? Okay,
Yeah,
because what
sure.
I find is that oftentimes, and my niche is more medical. Okay, so I work with very sick people. When I bring up hope, sometimes there's resistance. Okay, it's like, and the reaction is, don't sugarcoat
Yeah.
the reality for me. And I don't think I think there's a misconception about hope. Hope isn't, pink, white, washing the reality. So, how do you see hope?
I see hope as being almost like the basic commodity. It's like the first step, isn't it? It's very related to the idea of optimism. Because when you said that, I thought, oh, yeah, I immediately thought of people who say, hey, look, I don't want to get my hopes up. I don't want to have too high an expectation because I might be disappointed. Those people call themselves realists, but it's very closely connected, isn't it? Whereas hope is, without it, you're not really truly alive. I think the question of how we create hope is an interesting one. And someone's always got a model, a three-step approach to creating hope. But some of the things I've read there is, I think, firstly, when we, when we've gone through a stage and we have no hope, we don't know the way forward. It's actually about trying to find where to go next. So life may not have turned out the way we wanted. And I'm being very broad here, whether it is cancer, whether it is loss, whether it is some terrible catastrophe that's happened. But I think first is finding that first goal. I don't like the word goal, but something to work towards that's within your
Mm,
power. So I think that is really closely connected, that action. This is what we do as coaches, and it help people move forward. So you can't move forward unless you can see something that you're actually moving towards. So being able to actually identify what that kind of, where they want to go, what that realistic goal, what that place is, and then finding ways of getting there, possibly alternative pathways from the ones they were following before. I'm not being very specific, but I think this is really, really important. And the third part of gaining hope is to regain that sense of agency, that
yeah,
that sense of self-belief. Because once you
yeah.
lose that, it's very difficult to not chase goals, but move forward and also have this thing called hope. So it's not a platitude, but I do think it is the basic currency of life to be able to get through the tough times.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And I think that, for me, when I work with my clients, I talk less about moving forward and more about moving. It's like we definitely don't want to move backwards, but
Yeah.
sometimes, just being with my emotions for now, okay, or just breathing through it, I'm in movement. And I always say, if we look at nature, the opposite of movement is death. So things that don't, everything moves in nature, okay, in one way or another. So let's not be attached to the nature of the movement. It's not always this linear, let's move forward. Sometimes we can spiral around and, and be with it. That's movement as well. And I love how you emphasize realistic. Okay, because for me, I think that's what connects hope to optimism. Optimism is very grounded. So I see reality and I am looking to identify what else can I do? What can be possible? How can I move? Whereas if we're talking about malignant hope, and this is a concept that I came across about 6 months ago. So malignant hope is like a fantasy. It's not grounded. It's not optimism. It's like, when I am clinging on to malignant hope, I'm not seeing reality at all. So I love the connection that you're doing between hope and optimism, and you're grounding everything and those small little things like the agency. And I love those
Yeah.
3 steps. I love them. I think, for coaches, it's like, how do we do hope? Okay, 3 steps. Let's start, navigating that. I love it.
As you were speaking, I was thinking of 3 examples because it's always nice to speak specifically,
Yeah.
isn't it? I was thinking about all these changing circumstances, and as you said, I was speaking to somebody recently with a cancer diagnosis. I was actually talking to him about his experience at the time, and I was asked him that question. I said, "Well, how did you deal with that?" And his words were, "I just did the next thing." So his view of the world was he didn't look too far ahead. And what you said, that really resounded with me, Shiri. It was like, you don't have to move forward. You actually just have to do exist and know what the next step is. So for him, it was the test and then it was the treatment, etc. So I thought of that. And then I thought about the other example, which I mentioned, and I can speak personally, as many people can, of divorce. Your hopes get shattered around your expectations of family and long-term love, etc. What do you do to create hope there? And I think for me, I found it took time, but I created a new vision around what I wanted it to look like, whatever it was, what my idea of love, with it family. So I had a bigger sort of thing to put together, but that was more of a vision of down the track. And then I think of someone who might have gone through loss,
Yeah.
actually lost someone. You can't talk to them about, now, what are you going to do next? What's the next step? What's your next goal? And I think for someone like that, perhaps it's around, for someone in that situation, perhaps it's more around that survival. Maybe it is more around, we can't think forward, but right now is what happens today. How
Yeah.
do I go on, as you said, go on living? How do I survive in this new reality? There's plenty of time for all those other big things around hope and recreation, etc. But and they're 3 very different examples, aren't they, of changing circumstances, but all very impactful.
And I love them. I love how different and diverse they are. And I think when we're talking about loss, again, the biggest misconception is that we move away from loss, and we don't. We move with loss. We move forward with loss.
Both.
And it's our relationship with the loss that changes. So let's go into emotions, because oftentimes when people think about health and wellness coaches, they think about behavioral change, but we can't separate the emotions. So I'd love to hear your perspective, on emotions in the field of health and wellness coaching. Every word of wisdom.
Love this. I love this area because I feel like it is still an area that I'm learning so much about. I've got at least 10 books that I went to pull off my bookcase. I go, oh, I'm going to revisit that one. The emotional brain, emotional agility. And all of these things are wonderful because it's one person who's put together the way they see it, But I think one of the things that really sits with me, apart from the fact that Brené Brown identifies 89 emotions, so we can't possibly get a handle on them all straight away. But I think the thing that is, because I'm a big reader and I'm really big on language and words, so I've known that that for me is my lifeblood. It's the way I make sense of the world. And I think when I work with clients, that comes across because I feel that with emotions, if we can't name it, we can still feel it. But I don't think we can process it until we can put words to it. And I've had this discussion with someone recently. I said, if you can't name it, does it exist? Well, of course it exists. But I think to be able to help people find language is the start of healing and the start of processing. But it's the very first step, and most people struggle, really struggle. So I guess to answer to your question, I think emotions and I think language straight away. Do you?
I agree with you. I agree with you. And I think that with the language, we can just open it up. I remember that, a few years ago, I did this workshop with a coach by the name of Shiri Zimmerman, and she spoke about emotions, and she says it really doesn't matter. The name doesn't matter as long as you name it. And she had this emotion, I think she called it giggle juice. She knew what it was. And, for me,
Yeah.
giggle juice became a concept. So when we talk about, very similar to you when I work with clients around emotions, say, give it a name. And sometimes it's difficult for clients to give it a name because our emotional vocabulary tends to be quite small. So we confuse emotions with sensations and we give them metaphors and that's fine. Give it a name. It can be a metaphor, it can be a color, it can be a sensation, but we can't start processing something that's nameless. And I agree with you 100%.
True. And I think that with coaching, I think I do this a lot in my teaching, to say our job is to help people find the language to talk about what they're experiencing. And there's a couple of things there too. I think if we don't have the language to talk about our experiences, it's really hard to make sense of what's happening and to share it with others, not just with our coach, is it? So how can we possibly do that? And often if we don't, there's one thing that came up saying just because we name an experience or an emotion, because sometimes it's one and the same, it doesn't make it more powerful. Some people think, oh, if you talk about it, it's going to become real and therefore
Yeah.
it's going to have more power. It gives us the power of understanding and a sense of meaning. And then we get the sense of meaning behind what it is we're feeling, because that then starts the process to work through.
I am so happy you said that because that brings us to the whole topic of positive emotions versus negative emotions and how in the context of a health issue, people are like, no, I don't want to talk about negative emotions because, they're going to become real. They are here. They're in the space. They're real and they're human, not negative, not positive, human. So I'd love your perspective on the whole negative emotions and not talk about it. And let's just go to the positive, all of that.
I have to start with sharing something I read. You've got me reading a lot of things recently. I picked up a book from I don't know how long ago, and it talked about the most fascinating piece of research, and you might have come across this. Let's see if I've got some notes here to make sure I get it actually right here. So what they did a research, and they looked at people, they took blood measures, and they measured the amount of killer cells, i.e. the cells that will fight disease. And they had the person in a state of feeling positive emotions, and they measured. And then they had the person in the state of negative emotions, and they measured it. In both instances, the amount of cells, the good cells, the killer cells that are going to kill them, were there, whether it was positive or negative. And what they drew from that, the conclusion they drew from that says it shows that the absence of emotions can predispose someone to disease. And I
Really?
just thought that was good. And they're saying, look, this is what happens when people withdraw or become passive about their lives. So we need to rebuild our enthusiasm for lives. I actually read it in a book that was talking about people in retirement, particularly men who lost their sense of identity and went into chronic depression. And then I just read that little description of the study and I thought, isn't that amazing that science has come in and
Yeah.
said, actually, negative emotions keep us alive too. And it
It's the
doesn't matter as
emotional
long as we feel.
exactly, as long as we feel it, it's the emotional expression, it's being present, it's being authentic. Don't, because here's the thing, I heard this somewhere, what you don't deal with is gonna come and deal with you, okay? So, it's not mine, but, it makes sense. I love
But I
that.
think people are so frightened of negative emotions. I go, don't feel negative emotions. Whereas this is actually saying that feeling emotions, good or bad, activates the immune system. Now, that
Exactly.
doesn't mean that we want people to get stuck in the negative spiral of thinking, but be aware that you can't have joy without sadness. You know,
So
you can't have pleasure without pain. You just cannot experience the other side until you've got the yin and the yang. And I think we live in a world where, oh, the positivity and, oh, we all need to be smiling all the time and think positive thoughts has got out of hand. So I'd love to propose a new model to say, let's feel the lot, make sure we're feeling all of them so we can truly appreciate the good positive emotions. Otherwise, life is pretty bland.
it is. It is. And and when we talk about positive emotions, we're actually talking about feel good emotions versus emotions that don't feel so good. Doesn't make them negative. And I think what we need to be careful of is, that toxic positivity, where it's just the feel good emotions and we don't feel or talk about anything else. So it's about, being authentic and feeling whatever's in the space. Oftentimes when
Yeah.
I've been working a lot with women with cancer, and and a lot of women just don't connect to the whole pink boa thing. It's not their thing, and it's okay. And sometimes I come across patients that actually feel guilty. Does this mean I'm a negative person? It's like, no, it just means you're you, and and if you're pissed off, let's talk about that, because it's again, it's complex. We have all and it's the ability, and we as human have this amazing ability to hold more than one emotion, even if there are, there's polarity. We can be happy and scared. We can be frustrated and excited. We can be both. That's okay.
That reminds me of reading that, excitement and anxiety are very closely related.
They are.
And you'd think that one is the opposite of the other, but I was thinking about myself getting excited about something. I thought, we've got the same things going on in our body, whether I mean, I don't like to think it's a positive thing, but yeah, that's just so true. But I think too, when you were talking about, negative emotions, and then I mentioned getting stuck in this sort of negative way of thinking. Fortunately, I do believe that the research has shown that with negative emotions, they stick around longer. We teach you, we say they're like Velcro. Positive emotions are like butterflies. They go bing, 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 pride, joy, off we go, on with the washing up or whatever we're doing, writing the book. Whereas negative emotions like fear and shame and
Yeah.
jealousy and all that stuff, they just stick. And this is where I think you too are very interested in the concept of emotional agility,
Yep.
which I'm sure we were going to kind of talk a little bit about. And I'm
Yeah,
sure
we're
you have
gonna
your own. Yeah.
talk
So
about
it's
that in
that
a second.
being, yeah. Okay. So let's leave that till the next
Let's
bit.
talk about that.
So yeah, today they're there. They're needed too.
So you spoke about agility earlier, in the context of hope, and you mentioned emotional agility now. So what is emotional agility for you?
I think it's the ability to be able to navigate the emotions, to be able to, I think the first step is naming them. I think the first step is knowing what it is. So if you're feeling something that might be guilt or it might be shame, down that really dark end, but whatever it is, you can recognize it. Until you recognize it, you can't do what the recommendation, Susan David's work, as you know, has a nice little formula for remembering how to create emotional agility. And the first thing is actually to be able to name it. And then the next thing is she talks about stepping aside. So it's distancing ourselves
Yeah,
from the
that makes a
emotion,
big
isn't it? To be, yeah, to observe them. Ah, look at that. There's that old shame and jealousy and anger or resentment. It actually is just popping up. So I think that's the first thing when I think of agility. It is very much down to facing them, naming them, being curious and being kind about them because we feel this, oh, I'm jealous or envy. And we go, I must be a bad person. And yet to be able to say, "So how did I get this feeling? Where does this come from?" I think that's a big step, isn't it? To be able to be true to yourself, to say, "I'm feeling this feeling because I'll have insecurity over something that's happened in the past," or "I'm recognizing that my expectations," or "I'm comparing myself to someone." All that stuff is interpreted where you felt it. The first thing is to be able to observe it, just step aside, just show up and face it, and then detach and observe it. But you might wanna add to that too, because I know this is a topic you're really keen
No,
on too.
I love this formula. Okay. I think that one thing is, going back to language, okay, and here, both of us are kind of, women of language. I think that part of the detaching is remembering that I am not my emotion. So don't take the emotion and turn it into an adjective. It's just an emotion. And one thing that I do when I work with clients that tend to, you know, personalize the emotions, I ask them, how are you doing this emotion? They go like, what? What do you mean, how am I? That, what's the behavior of the emotions? How are you having this emotion? Okay, interesting. And those questions kind of bring on the idea that I can distance myself from the emotion. Ooh, interesting. What are we learning? I love that. And
That is so good.
when you get that distance, then you can invite the client into a place of choice. Because sometimes, in the midst of things that are going on, we don't have the time to deal with this emotion right now. We actually have to identify it, frame it, park it, and come back this evening, okay? And then process, but make sure that we do come back. So yeah, I love
That's
that
so
for me. I
It
love it.
also there was another interesting thing too, that an awareness came to me that when we're feeling an emotion, we will do everything to justify that emotion, to the point where we override knowledge,
Mm,
which I think is a bit scary, isn't it? Where we can't, until we can step back and look at what we know, when we're in it, everything in our human nature says, I need to make this emotion make sense. So therefore, I'm going to deny all evidence that my emotion is either a reaction or something else. I thought that was one thing that came to mind. And then the other thing that came to mind when you were saying, your emotions, what's the behavior? How am I acting this out? How am I actually doing it? And it reminded me of this physicality too, where you can use your body to trick your mind. So if you are feeling totally lacking in confidence or whatever it is, as we know, to change your body language can actually trick your mind and change the emotion.
my
I
God.
remember learning some counseling, Shira, you'd probably smile at this one. It was something called healing the whole person, and it was a therapist. He said I used to talk to his depressed clients, and one of the things he would get them to do is to stand up, because of course their body language was like this. Stand up, put their shoulders back, heads, their chin up, and say, I am so depressed. And of course, nine
It doesn't
times
work.
out of 10, they would start laughing. Now, it
Yes.
doesn't cure depression, don't get me wrong, but it's such a great thing, isn't it, to say, actually, just sometimes make your body do the thing that it should be doing if you felt something different. Anyway, as I say, don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting that that is a cure for depression, but I
No, it's
thought it was
not.
kind of a fun way of.
Yeah, depression is so much more complex than that. Plus, we have depressive states which are not full about. So it's a field. I think coaches need a lot more education here. But yeah, working through the body, that's an amazing tool. I do that a lot. Again, it's not a cure, but it brings in some resources and it kind of brings in some air. So I love this tip. These two tips. So I want to invite you to, if it's okay, to give us, before we wrap this up, two more, resilience building tips that you use
Okay.
with
And
clients.
these would be, and I can speak to personally, because I really do believe I only ever teach or I coach in a way that I can relate to as well. And I think the first one is the definite language writing, describing to be able to process. I think the next one is having self-compassion, which we are just not kind enough to ourselves. So being able to learn to self-soothe, to be the person that we turn to have that compassion, to say, we can't get it right all the time. I think that is the second one. And then the rebuilding hope is a big one. That's my third one. I'm going to get four. And the next one I think is this creativity of reinvention. It's like this is the new normal. This is, and I don't mean it to be a platitude. It's just this is where I'm at now. Maybe I can look at this in another way. Maybe I can become more of myself in a different way. but it's like reinventing, rebirth, starting again instead of just saying, "Oh, I'm just gonna carry going down." And I think in aging, that's a really great way to look at it, to go, "This is my second adulthood. What am I gonna do with it? Who am I gonna be now for the next 20 years?" And I'm going through those thoughts myself, so I'm very
Oh,
comfortable
same
using
here.
it with clients. I hope those help.
It does help. It helps a lot. And one thing that, that I'm sure you're going to relate to is that when we name the situation, what's happening right now, it doesn't mean we're accepting it, that we don't want to change it, that we're not looking for, different perspectives. It just means that we're creating a baseline. We are grounding ourselves. Okay, so this is where I am right now. This is my second adulthood. Now let's bring in choice. And when I
Yeah,
acknowledge the reality for what it is, it creates such a strong foundation to build choice and action on. Absolutely needed.
so true. Lovely. That's a lovely final comment there, Shiri. That was great. We
So
could talk for hours, couldn't we?
sorry, you were
We
saying?
could talk for hours on this.
We could. But I'm looking at the time and we have to start wrapping this up. So we're close to completion. And this was an incredible conversation. Fiona, thank you so much for saying yes. Where can
I
people
think,
find you and learn more about you and about what you do and the trainings? You have amazing trainings. So, of course, all this information is going to be in the caption. So, but where can people find you online?
well, amazingly, we get a lot of international students coming to us, not coming to Australia because, of course, the world has shrunk now, but because for many reasons, actually, one of them being, of course, the exchange rate. So our MBHWC-approved training is quite popular, and even though people then have to wake up in the middle of the night and do things like that, we're getting more and more people actually coming in from other countries. www.wellnesscoachingaustralia.com.au. We're also launching a training which is almost like an introduction to coaching, but with a lot of lifestyle information, such as what we're talking about. And that's really to talk to the people who are kind of helping people maybe in an unofficial way, unprofessional way, to give them a taste of what coaching's about, which I honestly believe everyone could benefit from basic skills of coaching and hoping that they will go on then, many of them will go on to actually do it professionally. So my email is simply fiona@wellnesscoachingaustralia.com.au. Very long, I know. And of course, the website, you'll get all the other information. But I love to hear from people. So really enjoy this connection with you and with the people I have all over the world.
So, as I said, that information is going to, we're going to write that information and add it. So thank you, Fiona, for joining me today. And thank you, audience, for taking the time to listen to this episode. So if you're a coach who wants to learn how to support your clients through life's hardest challenges, tune into our next episode and follow us online for more information, trainings, and of course, fascinating episodes. So thank you so much. And thank you again, Fiona, for saying yes.
Thank you, Shiri.
Bye-bye, everyone.